everyone, and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. My name is Madison, and I'm a high school senior from Vertis, Oklahoma, joined by, I think, the most people we've ever had at a Trek. And today we're talking about media. We're going to start off with a word association. So when you see your name on the list, do a quick introduction, and then very briefly your 1 to 3 words.
I am happy to get started. Hello, my name is Chabu. I am 19 and based out of Toronto. And when I think of media, narrative bending is the phrase that comes to mind. It plays such a key role in how we interpret and understand other people. And so those are my 2 words when it comes to media.
It's a good one.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm 23 years old and live in Pennsylvania. I think 2 words come to mind, bias, and in today's world, like algorithm comes to mind when it comes to like the media you consume. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Leora. I'm 18. I'm from Newton, Massachusetts. My 2 words are incredibly powerful. I feel like that is self-explanatory.
Hi, my name is Maryam. I'm 17 and I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, and my 3 words are influences public consciousness.
Hi, my name is Noor. I'm also 16 and also from the suburbs of Chicago. I use she, her pronouns, and my 2 words were power, or my 3 words were power, education, and influence.
My name is Thanasi. I'm from New York City, and I guess the 1 word I'll go with is bittersweet.
Hi, my name is Angel. 18 from DC, and I want to steal Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent, but I also want to say like commodifying the self. So either one that you find fitting, Madison, you can put down.
Madison to spell commodifying.
Hello, my name is Elena Ashburn. I'm 17. I currently live in Broward County, Florida. And I think that the 3 words that come to mind are at our fingertips.
Corey here.
It's sorry, I spelled it wrong.
Oh,
Kirolos. Hero. Hello, are you
Yes.
there? Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. I am Kirolos, 15 years old. I am from Egypt, Cairo. My 3 words are public and powerful.
Hi, my name is Allison. I'm 16 and I'm from Ohio, and my word is opinionated and loud.
Hi, my name is Justin from Chicago, and I'm gonna take from who said manufacturing consent. I like that. I'll take that.
Gary?
Yeah, I know. Hey, I'm Gary. I'm calling in from New York. Oh, no, I'm not. The first time I'm not calling in from New York. Whoops. Chicago. And I'm going to put narrative warfare.
Okay, and I'm going to say information overload. which I think is pretty self-explanatory. Oh, can't spell that either, apparently. All right, now on to the actual discussion. So if anyone has a question or a provocation, just shout it out. I can write it down and we can start talking about it.
I guess I can go for one, like pretty broad. Is the media as it grows become less meaningful?
Has media become less meaningful?
Yeah, like does having constant headlines in your pocket and being surrounded by media make every headline and every news story less meaningful to an individual?
That's a question for me? I
Just out there, right?
Jump in. Is it?
Yeah, anyone can answer it.
Yeah. I would say no. It's just become different, in my opinion.
What do you mean different?
I mean the way we consume media is different, but it's still, you know, as issues saturate, I think you know, media still has the same effect on people. We just don't have, you know, 3 or 4 channels to give us all our media, so you know everybody's not on the same page. But yeah, I don't media being less meaningful, unless I'm misunderstanding your question. I don't know. I think in many ways media has become more meaningful because it's largely responsible for, you know, where we find ourselves right now.
Yeah, I
which is
think like
pretty
media.
unprecedented.
Yeah, I think like media has become more overwhelming, but if anything, I feel like our generation's like more media obsessed than ever. We're constantly on our phones and constantly on apps taking in media. So
I feel like it's more meaningful because our generation essentially kind of what Julia said, but our generation essentially grew up with media, and I think we're like the first generation that has ever like grew up with media essentially, and I feel like it really impacts our life a lot. Yeah.
Going based off of what Thanasi described when he was like elaborating on his question, like focusing specifically on the like the multiple headlines like circulating, rotating through the media cycle that we're like constantly exposed to, I would say cheating, yes and no. I think no for the reasons that everyone here stated, but also yes, because we're getting desensitized almost to these stories. Just as quick as the headline comes, a new one is there to replace it the next day, not even the next day, like literally 10 seconds later. I mean, just look at how quick trends come and go. One day we have people posting, I don't know, like black squares on social media, for instance, at the behest of like the Black Lives Matter movement. And then maybe like not necessarily the next day, but the next month we're on to the next topic, the next issue. So I think that in a sense, it's become less meaningful, as in the impact is less, but long lasting, but there are debates to be had over like the word less. But while the duration isn't as long, the I would say the magnitude of the impact has definitely grown.
I really struggled internally with this question because like Angel, I definitely see both sides of the question. It is both yes and no. There's not one singular answer to this question. But when I first heard the question, I kind of thought of like the media as in specifically reporters. And I think because I'm on the school newspaper staff in my school, and we had a whole conversation the other day about how people take for granted what media reporters and people in media have to do in order to get these headlines out there constantly and all of the time and so quickly for us to read. And it can be pretty dangerous and difficult. I mean, we all saw with the Capitol riots that they were putting their lives in danger to capture video and to get the stories out so we could see what was going on. And in that sense, I feel like a lot of people now don't recognize like the I don't want to, I guess, sacrifices that reporters and people in the media have to make. And that was my immediate reaction to that question. But like Thanasi was saying, with desensitized due to volume of media consumed, I would definitely agree that we have become more desensitized just because I feel like there's always a crazy headline coming out and it's not, we don't take time to process it. We just kind of move on to the next headline, like Angel is saying. It's a never-ending cycle and we don't really take time to reflect on the things that we see.
Yeah, like to Angel and Thanasi's point as well. So like with the Capitol building in general, the media on that, I feel like the first 24 hours obviously was crazy, especially on the internet, but after like 48 hours, it was almost completely died out. And for work, we're approaching a campaign and someone's like, what, we don't know like if something's going to go crazy on inauguration day, whatever. And someone's like, it's like, it'll die down within 48 hours if something does. And I was like, kind of taken back by that statement, but I was also like, that's true because people's attention spans just move on so quickly now, almost like no matter how crazy the news is. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that, Julia. And I don't think that media as a whole has become less meaningful, but I think that each piece we consume has become drastically less meaningful. I mean, think of the most popular social media platform there is right now, TikTok. And it's based around like 15-second videos that people scroll for hours and hours, and they're consuming like drastically different content all the time. And so it's like a constant craze for more, like I said, it's an information overload. And I know that a lot of kids have spoken about, like Allison said, we've grown up with a lot of media. And so it's to this place to where a lot of people don't even feel comfortable not consuming media. Like they can't even sit by themselves in a room. Like I know that like it's hard for me to get ready without like listening to music or watching a YouTube video because we're just like at a constant state of stimulation. So I think that by virtue of that, every piece just becomes less meaningful, but not media as a whole.
And I don't think that the pandemic has really helped with that either. Like you're saying, like, honestly, it's been lonely. Like I haven't seen anyone except for my immediate family in months. I can't even tell you. So sometimes putting on a podcast or putting on an album, it makes me feel less alone. And I think that the pandemic in general, all of us have been consuming so much. And within this pandemic, so many things have happened. Obviously, a pandemic, a huge election, an insurrection. Like I could go on and on every day. There's a new story that is crazy and wild and would be the talk of the century if it was any other century.
I will say that I do think that media has become less meaningful, but it has become more impactful. When I think of things that are meaningful, I think of things that like really touch my heart, move me in a different way, provoke me to think differently. And I don't think that a lot of media is able to do that anymore as well as it may have been in the past. But I do think that the level of impact has essentially no boundary and influences more things than we could have anticipated. There's a distinction between meaningful and impactful, and I feel like that's really relevant here.
Yeah, I mean, also another part, and like the only reason I asked this question is because my parents and I always get into fights, and they're like, when we grew up, there were 4 news channels, and all the facts were the same. And like, well, that's true. It has its negatives and positives that we can talk about. But the other thing is like, it's so easy to like validate any belief you have with the amount of media. Like, you can definitely find someone writing an articulate piece about how the government is just lizard men in human suits, right? Like, you can validate your beliefs and live in these like different universes. So does that mean that news and facts as a whole, because of the widespread availability of all these like alternative facts, does that make factual content and truth less meaningful? Have we devalued as a society what it means to have the truth? Because the truth means a bunch of things to a bunch of different people now, and we're all in these different spaces, and if we can't come together, we can't do anything. So that's kind of how I think about it.
I think if anything,
Yeah, I totally agree.
truth is like subjective nowadays. I think it's because, like you were saying, there are so many like alternative media sources and alternative facts. It's not so much about we're all aligning and saying this is the truth. We can't all agree on one fact. Everyone can find their own truth, and they can find a source that fits their truth, versus finding the truth from the source.
Something we're kind of talking about in a philosophy class I'm taking is like this idea that as technology like gets more powerful, specifically in terms of like machinery and like AI, but I guess it also applies here. The more we take claims to be truths, like the more we see just claims as truths. And I think like personally, I know that like as like media just progresses into what it is becoming, like there was at least personally a lot of sensory overload, which is ironic because I think I've become very desensitized to the news. But I think that like being able to differentiate a claim versus an actual truth or something that you also agree with is like key to understanding that. And I think it's interesting that like kids in my philosophy class, like myself included, were really uncomfortable with the fact that like sometimes what you're told isn't the truth. And like you have to be the deciding factor of like, this is a claim versus a truth. And I can see truth in the claim if I have like the validity to, or if I have the resources to validate that.
I have a kind of related question. I was talking to Gary a while ago about like politicians and their decisions and how often it's motivated by like how their decisions, like how their policy sounds and looks and feels versus like the substantive effect that it has on the people. Do you think that's true? Do we all think that's true, or do we think it's like just we see that policy is more show now because media is just has like better clarity? I don't know if that made sense at all.
Are you asking like, do you think that policy is more performative because of the heightened media presence? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Well then, yeah, but I feel like there's also always been that sense of performative policy.
Yeah, I think what the same things get politicians to act, and we actually have a lot more mechanisms to get them to act now, and it's generally always public opinion, right? You look at everybody that ended up supporting Trump. At first, nobody did. His approval ratings hit 40% nationally, and he became popular within the Republican Party, and you had a totally obedient people who hated his guts, who don't believe a thing he says. I really think public opinion, above all, trumps all, no pun intended, in terms of what gets politicians to act. And a lot of times that can be what they perceive to be consensus issues based on what they see on social media, frankly.
But honestly, like, who can blame them, right? Like, if we've established that we're living in a society where people are constantly consuming things, we've talked about how, like, I don't think that people are really willing to go deep on policy. And so, like, branding and the way that things sound is, I would say, arguably more important than ever. And so, I mean, if I was a politician, I would want to make sure it sounds good. I mean, because, like, the things that I think a large part of why people like Trump is because like he says a lot of things that like sound good, like if you have absolutely no context. And so it makes sense that they've adapted to that sort of game.
Additionally, I think that it's also important to establish the fact that media in and of itself isn't necessarily the culprit that is causing what like Elena like perfectly called performative policy, right? I think we need to go beyond the media and look at like who is funding you. Well, and when I say media right now, I'm specifically talking about news media, but like who is funding you? Who are the stakeholders behind this operation? And what motivations do they have in promoting or demonizing a specific policy, you know? And that this like question or these series of questions go beyond social or news media and can be directly applied to like politicians themselves and who funds them. Or yeah.
I would agree with Angel. I don't think that media is necessarily the cause of performative policy. I do think it is a factor in performative policy. But like I said earlier, performative policy has always been there and will always be there. Because in essence, politicians normally want two things. They want power for themselves and their party, and they want to get reelected. And as long as they think that the policy that they're putting forth will resonate with their base and the voters that they are trying to cater to, then they're probably going to advocate for it and they're going to put it forward. Having media that, I guess, to Madison's point, had media that makes things sound a certain way, and I guess intention in how they want their policies to sound. Like Madison was kind of saying, you want your policy to sound good. And when media, a lot of what people read is just a headline or just like the little couple sentences that pop up in that notification, they're going to want to back policies that are going to be presented well in the media and presented well to their supporters.
I agree. Going off of Elena's and Angel's points, I think the public people in general doesn't know the politicians like personally, and so it's really hard to know what they actually believe in versus what they don't, versus what they are saying it because they wanted, to win the election and everything. It's really hard for the public, like as an audience, to differentiate if they're really for advocating for the policy or if they're just saying it because they're trying to win, essentially.
I think
Does it matter if they believe it? Or sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to interject like that. Just a hypothetical question. Does it matter if a politician really believes the issues they're pushing for, if they're going to get them done in response to public pressure either way?
I'd say no. Yes and no, but more on the no side, because I think that politicians are supposed to be representatives of the people, and I think we've turned that into people's mindset is the politician knows better than the people and like everybody else can be hands off while they make decisions for the masses. But if we look at the way that the country was supposed to be structured, representative government was just supposed to be a way to condense the view of the democratic majority so that we can make policies that help most people. So I'd say no, it really doesn't matter, just as long as they're doing the work of the people.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with Thanasi on that one. Politicians, when they step into the role of public servant, they are, as the name suggests, a servant to the public. And so in their job description, they need to put aside their own personal desires and their own personal opinions in order to enact the general will. So I think at least in the basic tenets of democracy, it shouldn't matter whether or not a politician believes in what they're passing, as long as it is a policy that will help the constituency. I don't think it should matter. Yeah.
In that same thought, I would say that the way that politicians are supposed to be like representative of the people, I do think that like the newfound trend of policy taking into account how it will be perceived by media is a reflection of the people and not necessarily political systems. It's not necessarily that like lawmakers feel personally incentivized, or maybe they do to an extent, to like make policy that will spin well, but the reaction of the people of constituents is why it's important to kind of take that into consideration, because that speaks to the long-term success of whatever is being passed.
Great point.
What do you think, Justin?
Didn't I pose that question?
Yeah.
You're changing the question I just posed? Yeah, I don't think it matters. Yeah, that's why I agree with you.
Would you guys mind if
At all. I really think it doesn't matter at all.
Would it be okay if I let us on a different question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. To what extent I'm inspired by two things. I'm inspired by Julia in her word association. What stood out to me is that she said biased. And then also we were talking about like finding sources that match your truth versus finding sources that tell the truth. So my question is, to what extent do you think the media you consume is biased, and how do you personally combat that?
Good question.
I think all of our media is biased, and it's something I actually think about all the time. I was thinking about the question you posed earlier today, just like philosophically, like how the fuck do we know what truth even is anymore? We're in a problematic scenario with, you know, really with the internet. It's like the internet's gone uncontrolled. But yeah, I absolutely think everything I read is biased, and I don't know how to combat it. And I think it's something a lot of people are trying to figure out. The only thing I can think of is math tends to be right. And that there's a universal truth that's unbiased. Go Andrew Yang.
Did you specifically target that for Madison?
Wait, what about Andrew Yang?
Yeah.
No, that's.
Well, I think a lot of us like Andrew Yang.
Yeah.
Madison, are you going to move to New York to work for Yang?
I'm going to move to New York just to vote for Yang.
Great. Welcome.
Oh, yeah.
This is a great question. I really don't take almost any political media seriously. And a big reason why I think it's like revolutionary that Civics Unplugged focuses so much on personal development, because that's like at the end of the day, like that's almost one of the only things that you can validate is working, whether tweaking like a process goal here or there, aka a habit, a routine, a thought pattern here or there, allows you to be a more like virtuous, flourishing human being that supports the flourishing of other people. And I think like you can build on top of that. You can build like your judgment based on like the small incremental changes that you make into your own life. And then like you can start trying to be able to better discern what, like, I guess to someone said above, like truth claims. How do you discern whether a claim makes sense? It's like a lot of it for me is if I've experienced that in real life, that I'm able to extrapolate. Does this claim make sense? I guess one thought is that like the most pure form of like media is real world experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think ever since when I graduated high school, I felt like a huge pressure when I was in high school to keep up with the news and read a bunch of media to make myself feel more informed. But when I started working full-time on CU and didn't have that pressure, I realized that the less media I read, the more I was actually informed, because I was able to use it to just as a piece of my worldview instead of use it to create my worldview. And I think that more and more, because the media has seeped and entered every part of our lives, it can only tell us a part of the story of whatever's going on. And it'll never be the full story. And I think, like Gary said, you kind of just have to use your lived experience to interpret it and use it as like a puzzle piece instead of the entire picture of the world.
I
And I think
that's
this is making me really appreciate New York, because New York, yeah, I mean, it's not the same. There's definitely like a ideological slant of New York, but it's still extremely diverse with a lot, like even on the traditional political spectrum. So you're going to be able to bump into people and talk to people that have all sorts of perspectives on all sorts of issues.
Well, off that vein, like I used to live in rural Alabama. So as you can imagine, there wasn't a whole lot of diversity of thought or opinion there. So in that sense, I wasn't able to use my worldview and my interactions with humans to really diversify the experience I was getting and the worldview and the viewpoint I had on what was going on current events wise. And in that case, I had to turn to a lot of media because it was like I was either getting Fox News word barfed at me, or I had to find it in other sources. So I guess in that case, like, it really depends on where you are and what your community is like. But as for the question specifically, of course, the media I consume is biased, but I think it's knowing that it is biased when you consume it. That makes all the difference, because if you go in blind and you believe that everything you read and consume is truthful, then you're just digging your grave in that sense. But I try to diversify the media I consume, as I'm sure many of us do. And I think that that's one of the best and only things we can really do, and to not put yourself in social media wise an echo chamber of one viewpoint and one ideology. Other than that, like Justin was saying, there's really not a whole lot you can do.
Elena, that's really interesting, because I kind of grew up on the opposite spectrum of that, and I still do. Like, I'm from Massachusetts, and which is very different from rural Alabama. I feel like I didn't realize until maybe around middle school, like how much I was just hearing one side of things. And I think, like, I agree, like, it's really hard to diversify your media. And what's even harder is realizing that you have to in the first place. And so I didn't take that step until I feel like later than I should have. And so I wonder, like, how that happens for people, or if it does.
Yeah, a similar experience kind of happens to me because at my school, we don't usually talk about like how media is. And in my school, it's like really like one kind of like ideology. And so it was kind of hard for me to know different people's perspectives. And so for me, I try to read different kind of media. There's like a conservative side of media, and there's much more progressive side of media. I try to like balance it out and then try to find like a balance in between, if that makes sense. But yeah, definitely agree that community does affect how you perceive and everything.
And I think it's like community alongside education. I remember in elementary school, we were told that there were like certain websites that were absolutely foolproof and like they weren't biased and you could always go to them. And they would be like factual, like that's what you did for a research project. And it wasn't until like I was listening to a lecture that was like, it kind of like solidified a thought that should have been clearer, but it's like no one can write or like have a message that is subjective. Like everything is subjective to an individual. And so once you're able to recognize that, I think that's only like part of realizing even that some of media is biased. Because I think, at least personally, the education system taught me up until middle school that like there were some websites that if I went to would tell me all the information I needed. And like growing up in like a relatively like obviously a polarized world, but also like a community that took a very specific stance on stuff. It was weird to like have the transition of like being told one thing and then like realizing almost the exact opposite as I got older, because those sites aren't actually like foolproof or what I was told they were.
Yeah, I think what we're getting at about community is really at the core of this. A quote that I really like is that change happens at the dinner table, which obviously it's not just about family, it's about friends and everyone you interact with. And I had a similar experience to Elena. Like, I live in rural Oklahoma, I have my entire life. And so I think for a while I wasn't able to gain different perspectives by my experiences until I joined CU. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it too, and why I really appreciate the CU community and new emerging digital first spaces, because you don't have to just like be in the same geographical location to learn from someone. And so really thankful that CU has afforded me those opportunities, and hope that it has been that space for other people as well.
I will say that I went to a school where we had an entire English unit dedicated to how to like address bias and like be self-aware or combat that. And walking out of that unit, I recognized the fact that like there was no way I was ever going to use any of the things that they suggested that we use. They're either time consuming or, take a lot of like critical thinking. And that level of like, it's not a process that's applicable to real life. But one thing that I do practice that's been really helpful is assuming that there's no such thing as unbiased media content, like Noor said, and then B, being aware of my own biases and the things that I construct. Being able to like call myself out or understand why I may be inclined for one thing instead of the other makes it easier to interpret how someone else might have undergone that same process and arrived at like, this is the information that's relevant, this is the commentary worth highlighting. Like all of those decisions are biased in some way or another. So I think it has very little to do with like assessing what's consumed, but assessing what we put out there as well.
I think that there's like, I've been doing a lot of thinking, like, I don't think there's anything we as like individuals who are not, in control of these tech companies, media outputs, like don't have huge platforms can do. But I think there's a real responsibility in these tech companies, like let's say Twitter or media companies like news media, to make fundamental design choices that combat these really toxic outputs. Like I read so much news that's obviously biased towards one side, and then they add the side of like this really radical outskirts opinion and make it seem like they're both equal in stature, right? And like they're like, oh, that means we're unbiased. Well, no, you just gave credence to a bunch of neo-Nazis and you equated their position down to something that most people believe, or the other way around, and then like Twitter, they make it easy for you to like and fall into these algorithm traps of toxic radicalization. Like there's a definite pipeline between like LOL triggered liberal YouTube videos and now you're on Reddit hating women for the rest of your life. So like we make it so easy to do that, and we can't really combat it, but I think there's people who can, and they've just chosen not to.
One of the things it kind of reminds me of from the John Vervaeke series is the idea of like herd mentality, like when it's okay and when it isn't. And so if it just so happens to be that like you have solidified beliefs and like what you believe to be is true, like are like claims that are true, and you're surrounded by people who have the same beliefs, who came about that themselves, and it just so happens to be that you're in the same place, like that type of like herd mentality, I guess, is like acceptable in his eyes. Whereas if it's like you're following what someone is telling you based off of the fact that you didn't necessarily come to that conclusion on your own, is the type of herd mentality that's negative, which I definitely think you see more of the latter.
I want to pose a provocation that's a bit in contradiction with what Thanasi proposed. I do think that like with such massive industries that all are starting to gain momentums of power over lots of different things, including politics, how can we engage in media that will innovate it for the better?
Great question.
Yeah, I think a big
Say get outside your comfort zone. Like go to the other side. Engage with something needs to happen to get us out of our bubbles.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll keep diverging. Something needs to start a real dialogue amongst bubbles. That would be innovative to see something that constructively brought that together.
Yeah, well, I think we're experimenting with it right now. I think a typical mental model of media is that it's a consumer media where like you're not interacting at all with the creator of the media or other audience members. Right now, we are all the creators and consumers of this, and I think that makes a big difference. And also the fact that we're calling in from like a dozen different states, like we have someone from Egypt, right? Like it does matter, right? And of course the fact that we're literally talking about media as well is important.
I agree, but at the same time, it's also very important to acknowledge that we're a very self-selecting group of people. And somehow, some way, we were able to obtain the experiences that helped develop our self-awareness, but it's extremely necessary to acknowledge that self-awareness doesn't develop in a vacuum. And there's like a Goliath media industry that doesn't want not only a media industry, but all of these various intersecting like realms of reality, right? They don't want the greater population to develop that self-awareness, that critical thinking, because then it leads to conversations like this, conversations that kind of shake the establishment. So the question is, how do you popularize a platform like this without it devolving into an echo chamber, and B, without it already attracting the people that would already want to like look outside their own bounds of reality and try to understand and empathize with the experiences of other people?
Definitely.
Go for it.
Sorry. Okay. I definitely agree with that. Like, I think I'm sure a lot of us will be, another creator platform, I don't know what you want to call it, another group that is doing this same sort of thing very well, in my opinion, is Jubilee. I think that they do a good job of trying to encourage civil and honest conversations about hard things. And I think that that is at the core of what we're all trying to say right now, is you have to get outside of your comfort zone and your echo chamber and talk to people in a civil way, because we all know that getting into a Twitter fight with someone is not going to change their mind, and it's not going to change your mind, and it's not going to benefit either of you. All that's going to do is just make your day a little worse. And I think that that is something everyone needs to work on, but especially our generation. I find it really hard, as someone who is very passionate about and works a lot on nonpartisan reform and like pushing this sort of nonpartisan, agenda of trying to not be hold into one of two parties. It's really hard when we are falling into that trap of partisanship within our media and within our social media. of attacking one another and not empathizing. I think Angel said that you have to be willing to empathize and hear people out. And I think that that's got to be number one on the priority list if we're trying to make media better, or at least understand who everyone is.
Yeah, I think I'm about to say something that might come back to bite me in 20 years, but like, I don't think the way to, you know, make things better is to like have everybody have a self-awakening, because it's never going to happen, right? We got into this mess by having algorithms that made people think a certain way and separate people and put them into echo chambers, and like the algorithms did this, and whether or not it was like a planned or a byproduct, like it's we're here. So what I've been thinking a lot about is like, you know, let's take AOC, right? A lot of people hate her, a lot of people love her. She has millions of followers, but she only has like 10,000 different archetypes of humans that follow her, right? And then they all get pushed in a bubble and they all go in one direction. So the question I have is like, what happens if someone builds a media organization, and how moral is it if someone builds a platform where it uses the algorithms to like push everybody in the right direction, and the right direction being, you know, maybe you interact, maybe you think in a certain way that's better for everybody. But like the algorithms pushed us all into these echo chambers that make us fight and that make us hate each other and that make us believe certain things. And I think that there are a good amount of Americans who don't care about politics and are manipulated into thinking a certain way, and can just as easily be manipulated into thinking another way with an algorithm. So how moral is it to manipulate them in the right way? I don't know.
Wrong speak, right speak. Very dangerous, Thanasi.
Oh, I know it is. I know.
I think that it's worth posing the conversation of morals and media and what that dynamic is. But like in response to what was just said, I think that if there's like one golden rule to follow when it comes to media and morals, it's definitely that there should be there needs to be a diversity of morals and perspectives, or like you're instantaneously engaging in something that's like counterproductive and like cultivating of, you know, a mindset that's like not well informed and just pushing people into believing the same thing. But yeah, and the thing is, because of the way that media has like grown so substantially recently, there's not enough guidelines or discussions around how can you engage in like an ethical code, like moral behavior in social platforms and media.
Cool. I think that this is good timing to go ahead and move on to the reflection section. So I'm going to copy a link of these notes here and send them to the chat so that you all can look at what we talked about. And once you have your reflection, you can shout it out and I will write it down. I guess I can go ahead and get us started. I think what this really solidified for me is like what role people play in shaping opinions as opposed to media. Like, I'm not sure how many times my opinion has been changed by like a certain piece of media or like just a couple pieces of media. All the times when I think when my opinion's been changed, it's been like either by a personal experience or experience with someone else who has like that I've known for an extended period of time, and obviously not in like the format of a debate, but like through like actual genuine conversation rooted in understanding. And so that was just really solidified for me.
Yeah, I want to second that. My family had some tense conversations this summer about all sorts of things. But it was once we started to actually have a routine of talking out things and trying to achieve understanding and talk about where we were getting our media and all that, where like everyone sort of de-radicalized. It was really interesting to see. This is why I place so much faith in kind of nicely structured dialogue, in allowing us to be sort of better people that are better able to receive information and use it in ways that are useful.
Reflecting upon like all of the personal stories that have been shared today, I definitely think that I don't know if my mind has been changed, but I feel like my opinions have been reaffirmed that change when it comes to the media is definitely grassroots, but at the same time, it's dangerous to just leave it all to the people when it is the top, like Thanasi kept bringing up, the algorithms that have corralled us into into these toxic mindsets. So I think that while change is grassroots, it's also necessary to hold the puppeteers accountable for the mess that we are currently in as it pertains to dialogue, humane, empathetic dialogue.
As we were talking about this, I kind of was thinking about like, is there like ethics and a moral code to the internet and the media? And I don't really think there is. And also I don't know if there's a real movement or anything to make that happen, but even if people want it to happen. So that's just kind of what I'm reflecting on.
Gary, it's time to leave CU. You have to create a moral code for the internet. That's your new calling.
Yes.
Back to Google.
God, Google.
I think to Leora's point, like as someone who's interested in going into journalism, at least for like the next 4 years, I think it's like, it's cool that like as the most empathetic generation, like there's a way that we could shape the media and what it would turn into. Because I think that like, in the same way that we've become desensitized to media, like we've become desensitized to the word echo chamber. Like it comes up so often, but I don't think I realized how scary it was until like you really think about it. And it's like, you really are hearing nothing else. And so as someone who wants to go into that, I think it's just, it puts the power back into your hands, which is comforting to have.
Going off of what Noor said, I feel like all of us in practice like recognize our own biases and like, oh, it's important to have diverse perspectives and like get out of our comfort zones. But like in actual conversation, I feel like we all shy away from it. And like especially like on social media, I feel like we've seen the rise of cancel culture. Like instead of actually like engaging in dialogue with other people, we kind of just were like, nope, canceled, it's over. And I feel like people like have a hard time in practice kind of engaging in these dialogues across like different ideologies, and like myself included, definitely. So I think that's something like reflecting on this conversation that I want to kind of explore more and figure out how to engage in those conversations more productively.
I agree with Maryam. I think our generation do have a chance in shaping the media, like what Noor said. But I feel like it really depends on our generation if we are willing to have these kind of conversations, if we are willing to know different people's echo chambers or ideologies, perspectives, etc. But I feel like it really depends on how we move things forward, essentially, with media and everything.
I was reflecting on a few of the questions that we had that revolved around, combating bias and just like how we respond to it. And so much of what everyone said had to do with like how we engage with it as individuals, but not only how we engage with it, but also like what our goal is or what the objective is in that engagement. So like it shouldn't be about trying to garner the perspective or like argue with someone and say, yes, I'm right, no, you're wrong, but it should really just be for the sake of exposure, and like continuously popping your own bubble of thinking that you have like a foundational understanding of everything. I think driving home the point of like saying that there is no such thing as like unbiased content is just a really good thing to do over time.
I really liked what Noor had to say. And I guess I don't know if I'm doing this right, but reflecting on this conversation, I am encouraged as somebody who has spent the last like 4 years on these platforms way too much. It's really depressing, and they've become really counterproductive to like everything like a healthy society needs. But it truly is in your hands, everything. And I mean, the future is yours. And the problems we face are serious. And I truly believe that these companies and these algorithms have created problems that are going to get worse before they're going to get better. But the great news is, you know, the fact what you guys have even put together here, just the way you're able to communicate with one another is incredibly encouraging to watch, and yeah, inspiring, frankly. It's awesome. So yeah.
I think this conversation has really shown me how much more I just personally need to think and learn about all the aspects of media and everything it touches. But like the point that Gary and Madison and Angel and pretty much everybody made, like about how media is just an extension of your personal experience and how it shapes the way you view the world is it's super interesting, because I feel like if we can figure out a way to get everybody in the same universe, then we can start having substantive conversations about how to like make the universe better. And that grounding principle is something that's going to guide me through whatever I learn next.
I think that a theme throughout this that's really stuck to me is the theme of like desensitizing and like being desensitized by media. And just like we're kind of desensitized by the headlines, or we've kind of been desensitized by the word echo chamber, and we don't really stop and think about that. I think that we need to make sure that we don't do that for the phrase that Chabu said, there's no such thing as unbiased content, because the moment we take that for granted and we don't start thinking about that we don't think about that critically, and we don't, take that as serious or as important to remember, that's when we're going to start falling down that trap that we are trying to keep ourselves out of. So just trying not to get too desensitized, I think, is something I'm definitely going to take away from this. Definitely trying to bring more empathy into the things I read and the media I consume.
Could I talk?
Yeah, go ahead.
In my point of view, that media is different from one person to another. One person could receive it in a way that could impact him, and another person could, just hear it from this ear and get out from this ear. And also, I see that media has been more not authentic in this nowadays. Could some talk about real news? Could some talk about not fake news? So I think that it's maybe impactful, but not authentic.
I liked the last question of how can we engage in media that will innovate it for the better. It's definitely something I'm going to like ponder on, because obviously the first step is recognizing and discussing issues, and it's crazy important, but then seriously thinking about how we can approach this and like action items is interesting, because obviously media is so tied in with the internet now, and that's a huge issue to approach. So I just really like that question. I think it's a good conversation to keep at the forefront.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. Again, such a good conversation. This is actually our second trek on media, but I already know this was very different from the first one we did, because we did it as one of our first ones. But yeah, if there's no other comments, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. Gary, anything?
Well, this is an experiment with a larger group. This is definitely on the higher end of what we would want, I think. But anyone have thoughts on the biggest trek we've had so far?
I think it went great. Like, I feel like it wasn't too messy and speaker over each other like big Zoom webinars usually are. So I think it went pretty well.
Agreed. I haven't been able to go to one in a few weeks, but I think just based on like the last one I was at, the vibe in terms of like being able to like add to the conversation was pretty much the same.
I'd say that the last one I went to was the mental health one, like a long time ago. But I like this because I liked hearing all of the diversity of thought and opinion that we had. And I'd find myself wanting to say something, but someone else would say something, and it would make me change how I thought, like the idea that I had. And I think that's kind of the point, is you want to look at your ideas differently and your thoughts differently.
Wow, that's a great point, Elena. I didn't even think about that as like a benefit of having so many people. Like talking less just means you get to listen more. And the fact that it's changing what you're thinking, like right before you're about to say it, that's so cool. So yeah, I think we should keep experimenting with like larger and smaller groups for different conversations. But yeah, thank you, Justin, for joining us. Great to have you as a guest. Loved hearing from you. Yes, a little clap for Justin.
Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it.
And for him retweeting the video this morning, super G, man.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everyone. Always fun to do these sort of spontaneous ones scheduled during the day. All right. Thank you, Madison, for organizing as always. Take care.
Yeah. See y'all later. Bye.